that time. And we felt we were in there, witnessing the first time round, the first version of this music.
The word was coming to Maharishi that they had suspended their meditations and that they were sitting and composing music and things.
We were there for about 6 weeks, and during that time, there was no pressure from the outside world. There was no pressure of them being Beatles, and their creative juices just overflowed. They wrote all the songs for the White Album. They worked out gradually what they wanted to do for the rest of their time as Beatles.
Other than when they're in the studio, they didn't get to spend a lot of time together. So in India, they were suddenly together like sort of mates again. So they could sit out and play in the way that John and Paul used to play in the council house where Paul had grown up. And you've got Mike Love from the Beach Boys is there, so they've got that whole tributary of American music that had influenced them. And Donovan with his kind of folk tradition, and Paul Horn, who was a jazz flautist, he was there too. So you've got a lot of interesting sort of streams coming in.
I'll show you the stairs here. They'll sit here on these stairs. Here was one bamboo structure here as a fence those days. They would come and they would make new songs here, staying here, sitting on these stairs. In that side, Prudence were living. Maharishi told her to be inside, stay with their practices.
Mia Farrow's sister, Prudence, is way ahead of anybody else. As soon as she entered her thing, she went into meditation, and she has not emerged. It's already 24 hours. So she's serious.
They would invite her outside. Hello, Prudence, come out, Prudence, and she won't come. And then they made a song, Dear Prudence.
I think one that's kind of interesting is when I came back from a tiger hunt with my eldest son. When we came walking in, he said to Maharishi, I shot a tiger today. Is that bad karma? Well, sitting there observing this was John Lennon. And John said, you don't call that slightly life-destructive? And I said, it was the tiger or us.
Espionage by agents of the Sino-Soviet intelligence system. You recognize the way a Sino or Soviet agent operates, both in finding someone vulnerable to subversion, as well as in their technique of ensnaring him and applying pressure to get him to play ball.
The KGB sent their top man in India, Bezmenov, to the ashram to check out the Maharishi.
My function was to discover what kind of people attend this school. Yes, there are some influential opinion makers who come back with the crazy stories about Indian philosophy. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, a great spiritual leader, or maybe a great charlatan and crook, depending on from which side you're looking at him. Beatles were trained at his ashram. Mia Farrow and other useful idiots from Hollywood visited his school, and they returned back to United States absolutely zonked out of their minds with marijuana, hashish, and crazy ideas of meditation.
Maharishi used to always say, you can never create peace through signing treaties, through legislation, through any kind of external means. The only way to create world peace is for people to meditate.
You see, if you carefully look, what Maharishi Mahesh Yogi is teaching is that most of the problems, most of the burning issues of today can be solved simply by meditating. Don't rock the boat. Don't get involved. Just sit down, look at your navel, and meditate. And the things, due to some strange logic, due to cosmic vibration, will settle down by themselves.
The single aim of spiritually regenerating every man everywhere in the world and creating peace
You can get control of yourself just by sitting quietly and by turning off from the external problems you have and all this society. You can go inside yourself where it's always calm and peaceful.
This is exactly what the KGB and Marxist-Leninist propaganda want, to distract their attention and mental energy from real issues into non-issues, into non-existent harmony. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi obviously is not on the payroll of the KGB, but whether he knows it or not, he contributes greatly to demoralization of American society.
Paul McCartney and his girlfriend Jane Asher stayed for 5 weeks, and they left because Jane had a theatrical commitment back in London.
This presumably is your first big meditation, and what effect has it had on you?
I think it calms you down. It's hard to tell because it was so different, life out there. It'll be easier to tell now that I'm back and we're doing sort of ordinary things, to see just what it does.
They were 4 working-class guys from Liverpool. They had an innate sense of not being taken advantage of. So when they get together with Maharishi is inevitably tempted to capitalize on his sudden worldwide fame because of the Beatles association.
They realized that maybe Maharishi had been using them all along for publicity, ever since the vinyl record that was by the Beatles' spiritual teacher, it said on the album. So John and George started to think something fishy is here, he's using us for publicity.
So they began to hear little bits of news here and there from the grapevine of, your Maharishi's planning this and planning that, and you're going to be in it. And they're going, are we?
Maharishi kept promising ABC that he would do a special with the Beatles. And the Beatles kept saying, we're not going to do this special, but Maharishi kept promising it over and over.
There comes a time in late '67 when Paul and George go to Sweden, basically to tell the Maharishi to cool it a bit, Don't start making plans that involve us without telling us first.
We're glad to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you.
We do appreciate your music, and that's good, yes?
The smell of the flowers. We only decided to come yesterday.
Yes.
Just to pop over to have a little chat.
Yes.
And when the Beatles were in Rishikesh, he, without their knowledge, was having discussions with a Hollywood film company called 4-Star International.
Maharishi promised them that they could have exclusive rights to make a film about Maharishi and about Maharishi's guru. But unfortunately, Maharishi made the same promise to someone else. He had given rights to 4-Star Productions. The lawyer arrived in Rishikesh with a signed contract that gave exclusive rights to film Maharishi for the next 5 years.
Some suits arrived from Hollywood and a crew. And John and George were going, we didn't want this. We're here to meditate. We don't want these film people here. And there was a confrontation with Maharishi about, why are you doing this? We told you not to.
In any case, the Beatles became quite disillusioned about that. The film was really kind of a deal breaker. And they got very angry because they had been granted exclusive rights to do this film, and now another film company is there. So the whole thing just fell apart.
I don't know what happened. I still don't know, and I know there are many rumours around. But John said, that's it, we're going. But I know John wanted to come back to England and see Yoko. And so any little excuse, and John was ready to go, because we'd been there for weeks.
Well, it was only John who was upset. John dragged George along. And I still think it was when Magic Alex came from the Apple Corps group.
Alexis Mardis was one of the Beatles' associates. In fact, he was very close to John. He had sort of attached himself to John's hip, and Cynthia really didn't like Alexis. She was very concerned about the Svengali influence that he was having on John. John had introduced Alex as my new guru. He was this electronics marvel, supposedly. He introduced himself as somebody who was like Edison and Marconi combined. But in fact, he was just a TV repairman.
We just got a friend of ours who's in electronics.
Oh, yeah?
Who's called Alex. And he's great, he's a Greek fella. And he's invented incredible things.
He was a minx, naughty little boy. You see, he wanted to have power over John. And so he would, create all these things, pretending he's a scientist. He said, oh, here's this wonderful new wallpaper, but it's all speakers. So the whole room will have one big speaker. So he loved all that, controlling John. So clearly and obviously, Maharishi was in the way.
One night, John and Maharishi were having this wonderful rapport. And you know how you can see sometimes when a person lets the mask drop on their face? And I could see this really dislike of Maharishi on Magic Alex's face. It disturbed me enough that I felt that something was going wrong.
No one ever saw him meditating. And as a matter of fact, he admitted that he came to India for the purpose of getting the Beatles away from Maharishi. Alexis said, oh, it's because we don't want Maharishi to have that much influence over the boys.
I'm totally convinced that Magic Alex made a friend of one of the young women at the ashram, and he got her to tell John Lennon that she was having sex with Maharishi. This just horrified all of us when this whole thing happened.
I believe that Maharishi made a pass, and the reason I believe it is because he made a pass at many women that I knew. It wasn't the first or the last one.
Well, I remember Maharishi saying that, if you have an ugly woman over here and a beautiful woman over there, it's just easier for your attention to go to the more beautiful.
John and George didn't believe it at first, but finally Alexis convinced them and then went and got taxis for all of them before they could change their mind. While they were waiting for the taxis, John wrote, Maharishi, Maharishi, what have you done? You made a fool of everyone. The song had a lot of expletives in it, and George said, you can't say that, that's ridiculous. So John changed the lyrics to Sexy Sadie.
Yeah, Sexy Sadie, it was actually called Maharishi, and it was a put down of the Maharishi in very vicious terms. I don't think there was any chance of it getting out with the words that John had originally, but basically denounces him and says he was a bit of a rogue.
John dragged George along, and then he just bolted from the ashram.
I think Maharishi was a mistake.
What do you mean they were a mistake?
We made a mistake.
We thought there was more to him than there was, but he's human. And for a while we thought he wasn't, thought he was
Back home we got a postcard in the mail. But that was in the good old days, along the hippie trail. The Beatles, they were opening us up to different experiences in various ways, Indian philosophy and Indian music. And then when they went to Rishikesh, it was the idea of Indian travel. It's like, well, looks nice over there, they're enjoying themselves in the sunshine. There'd been a hippie trail, an embryonic hippie trail in the early 60s. A few people had gone out. The whole point being that you drove overland. The ultimate destination was, in fact, Kathmandu in Nepal. I'm sure the Beatles inspired lots of people to go because this little trickle of people on the hippie trail beforehand suddenly turned into a flood.
Did you enjoy the trip over to India?
Yes, the journey was terrible. But the trip was all right.
Yeah. There was a report that, now we get very bad reports.
Smashed him.
That you didn't like it, or you didn't have the patience, and you decided to go home.
We were there 4 months, or George and I were.
Did you think this man is on the level?
I don't know what level he's on, but he's on the. We had a nice holiday in India and came back rested.
Maharishi looked visibly frail and without his usual effervescence. His brilliant and beautiful yogic radiance was reduced to gray and ashen. He became physically sick when the course moved from Rishikesh to Kashmir.
He's still a nice fella and everybody's fine, but we don't go out with him anymore.
When the Rishikesh experience finished, Paul, John and Ringo just kind of carried on, resumed with their lives. But for George, India was never a 5-minute thing. India was a lifetime devotion. And he wasn't just going to give it up because of the way that Rishikesh finished with a bit of a sour taste. India for him was something that he continued to push.
George didn't want to go back to London. George was still in meditation mode and he didn't want to go straight back to see the press. So he said, let's go down to Kerala just for a week. And it was very calm then. And then, you know, he wanted to slowly come back into sort of business life, as it were, in London, slowly, in his way.
I mean, because everybody all of a sudden became an individual. John, Paul, Ringo, and George. The Maharishi phase faded out, you know, but the Indian aesthetics and the etiquettes remain with everybody, using the influence of Indian music and the culture.
You know, when you look back at the Beatles' story on their return to the UK in the spring of 1968, there was still the camaraderie that saw them through the madness of Beatlemania, soon to dissolve as the fraught sessions for the White Album began. Working separately most of the time and not as a unit, and with Ringo quitting the band for a short period, remarkably, they delivered what many would call one of their greatest albums.
When the Beatles were in India, Maharishi told them if they don't continue meditating regularly, their band would break up.
Hold it. Now, does this mean a business or emotional split within the Beatles?
I should think a bit of both. Oh, it's probably to do with growing up and to do with... There was a time when there were just 4 of them, but now they're married and there are children.
I was born in 1971, same time around when Beatles broke up. I mean, even like, I guess it's about 50 odd years or something. It still sounds fresh. It sounds amazing. The world would have been like so shit without them, you know. The world is so much better to live in with that music around.
The songs that they made in India, in Rishikesh, I had no idea. And out of them, some of the songs like Blackbird, like Dear Prudence, like these are some of the songs that I used to perform in my old band in Chennai. To have known that they have written these songs in India just gave it so much more meaning, because I used to connect to these songs as a classical musician more than a person who loves English music.
I was born in 74. So for me, to get to know the Beatles happened much later. We were not really born at the time when the dressing, how a Beatles haircut or the dress that they wore really attracted us. We didn't see that. We only heard the music. It's purely the music. It sounded very simple, very catchy, and you could, you know, it had a high recall. So whenever you heard a song, you would remember it. But when you sat down to work on it, to try and see if you can sing that song, that is when you realize the complexity of it. I don't know how it was appreciated when it was released, but it's something that is still relevant today.
They came to see in the fullness of time. In particular, in George's case, George discovered from gathering evidence what exactly happened at the end of their stay in Rishikesh and how Alexis Mardas, Magic Alex, had cooked up this whole thing.
George always loved Maharishi, and toward the end of his life, he went back to see Maharishi.
George said, to Maharishi, "I came to apologize." And Maharishi asked, "For what?" And George replied, "You know for what."
Maharishi apparently said to George he believed that the Beatles were angels on earth and that they were not guilty of any crime themselves. So when George came away from that meeting, he felt cleansed of his guilt of the method of the departure back in 1968.
I got into India. I think that was the one thing in my life that I could have done without everything else, but that one thing of getting in touch with what's inside through Maharishi and Ravi Shankar and Indian music.
And as for the others, well, they all warmed again to the culture and the spirituality of India.
The only way we can change the system is by changing it non-violently, because they've done the violent kick for millions of years, you know. I think the only way to do it is Gandhi's way, and that's non-violent, passive, positive, or whatever they called it those days, you know.
John Lennon spoke kindly of Maharishi in other interviews. Ringo and Paul have both said the same. Everything became okay again in the end.
Years ago, we studied meditation with the Maharishi. He was one of the ones that wasn't a fake. There were a lot of them around that time who were into Rolls Royces and chicks. He wasn't one of them. I actually met him quite recently. He lives in the Netherlands now. And I took Stella, my daughter, and James, my son, with me. And he is a spry old codger. He's in his 80s, and he's still working, he's still going.
The day when the Maharishi Yogi died, there was a big storm. The water from the river Ganges came whirling up, and it showered in this bungalow. The local folks who came here to pay their tributes to Maharishi Mahesh Yogi were amazed to see this supernatural thing. It was a power of Maharishi which brought Ganga on this top of mountain.
When I first came here 10 years ago, this was just jungle, ruins and jungle. And you would sneak in through the back, there were cracks in the wall, and you would smoke pot and see leopards at night. This is what people did. So I take tourists into the ashram, I show them everything, and I'm trying to bring them back into 1968 and give them some of the experience of the Beatles here. Tourists that come here, they really appreciate it. They really appreciate to have the sense for the Beatles as a historical entity.
My experience when I went to the Beatles ashram was super magical. These huge superstars, you wouldn't really think that they'd go to a really simple, no-frills ashram in Rishikesh. The most exciting thing about music is the way that it has the capacity to shift cultural norms and expand people's minds. And in India, that's exactly what the Beatles did by bridging the gap between East and West in a country that was very much under this, dark cloud of colonial rule, which in many ways created a culture of apology for being Indian and a reverence for whatever was foreign. That what was so powerful is for the most powerful band in the world to come and revere our culture.
They had descended in our part of the country and they had embraced the spiritual narrative of India, and they had come to Rishikesh and they have images of them with Mahesh Yogi. And then suddenly we felt, look, they are one of us.
As kids, as Indian kids, we're always rebelling against our culture. And then you realize that something that is so influential in pop culture took a lot of influence from India. My introduction to them was I happened to be part of the age of illegal downloading at the time of Napster and stuff.
We used to have the White Album on CD. That was my first introduction to the Beatles. We still felt its influence even though we were born in the 80s and 90s. India is considered this place where you could go for a spiritual awakening, for meditation. So I think the Beatles came to India to look for that, and in some ways they really did find that. I guess that's a small gift that India gave the world through the Beatles.
The happiest time of my life. One of the happiest times was in India. And it was just such a groove. You know, it was such a pure thing. Everything is slightly more in perspective.
The whole of life should be a spiritual experience because we are spirits who are just encased in bodies. People forget that and think they're just this body, but we're actually spirits in bodies.